Well, hello again. This is Derek Kopp. Welcome to another edition of Shifting Perspectives. I have Dalton Stewart with me today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'll tell you why. I've always had in my head for a long time that I am the only person who thinks the way that I think. And I've even taken on this identity that I am unique and weird, and people don't like me for that. Dalton and I have met in group coaching sessions and different things through the Ramsey coaching network. And honestly, we've never really sat down and had a one-on-one conversation with each other. Yet, we have said things in group sessions before that have just resonated with each other. Just by facial response, we can tell that what I said made sense to him, what he says makes sense to me. So this conversation simply is dedicated to exploring types of people like us who are all or nothing type of people, the way we think, the way we look at the world, the pros, the cons. So if you're an all or nothing type of person, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation simply because I think you'll realize that you are not the only one who thinks the way you think. So let's jump right in. And Dalton, I'll kick it off with this question. When did you realize that you were an all or nothing type of person?
That's a great question, Derek. I do want to say, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to hop on here. I didn't imagine our first actual one-on-one conversation would be here on a podcast, but hey, that's how we do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to all or nothing.
Right? That's right. We just jump right in.
Yeah. When did I realize that I was an all or nothing individual? I really think that it came post one of my business failures. I as I go back and I look at different aspects of my life, for example, with the military, I would say that's one of the most prominent things that was an all or nothing thing that stood out in my life at the forefront. Little backstory on that. I went in to talk to a recruiter. I graduated high school early, moved out to Colorado, was living out in Colorado for a year. Long story short, ended back up in Illinois, and I'm like, I have to get out here. What's going to be the quickest way? I need to find ways to fund schooling. And so sure enough, I went in to talk to the recruiter, and I was going to go just reserves, National Guard, do my time, get my schooling paid for. And then sure enough, I sit down with this recruiter and I sign up for special operations selection, just go in full bore. We're jumping out of airplanes, all the fun stuff. And so that was like one of the first main things where I really saw that all or nothing mentality, something prominent. And then from there, after I got medically discharged, and really started embarking on my business journey before working at Ramsey, there was a lot of that influenced what I did in my business, in my career. And obviously, like, the more aware that I became of it, the more I see it in my day-to-day life. So time frame wise, realistically, it's probably been about 4 years that I've known that it's just a way that I function and I operate.
But knowing that now, when you look back beyond that 4 years, you see it showing up. Like, it was driving your life before you realized it was driving your life. Or is it a driving force in your life before you realized it was a driving force in your life?
It's interesting because whenever I think of when I was younger, there was the internal desire for that all or nothing, but I didn't see it as prominent, like, in my life.
Really?
Whenever I look over the years of, like, the things that really stood out to me, it was the military. Back whenever I was younger, I raced dirt bikes for many years. That would probably be like the other thing that really stood out to me. However, there was a lot of things that I tried. For example, skateboarding, snowboarding. I was very into action sports. However, I found myself, I just wasn't good at them. And so for me, it was like that all or nothing. That was where that nothing mentality of not being good at something, it was just, whoop, I'm done. So
if I can't do it right, it's not worth doing at all. Yeah, that resonates. That's what you're describing. That resonates with you.
Yeah.
I remember, and I don't think I realized this at the time. I would not call myself a risky type of individual in the greater scheme of things. But at the same time, I think the idea about, like, just pushing the limits on small things is what I, like, always did. I was on a mission trip in Ireland, and on the west coast of Ireland, there's the Cliffs of Moher. It's, like a couple 100 feet drop straight down to the Atlantic Ocean. And I was like, it'd be cool if I laid on my back. Like if I laid on my back and my waist was basically at the edge, somebody's sitting on my feet, and I just like go spread eagle over the ocean, right? And
Yeah,
there's a guy
that's
named
wild.
Carol who said, yeah, I'll sit on your legs. And so here I am, 21 years old, and nobody else is going to even come close to doing this. But I did it. I got a picture of it. And like, it was a thrill. I didn't understand why people thought that was a ridiculous thing to do. But to me, it was that thrill of like that momentary, like, I wasn't satisfied to stand, 10 feet or 100 feet from the edge. I had to be like over the edge.
Well, see, and when you share it from that perspective, I mean, I've always considered myself somebody who is an adrenaline junkie. Like I raced dirt bikes, rode snowmobiles, had fast cars. There is something about like that moment that's so blissful. That's why one of my biggest fears has always been heights. Like Derek, I'm the kind of person that like shakes climbing off of a ladder from a roof, and I decide to go jump out of an airplane. Like it makes no sense looking back on it. And I remember when I was younger, I always said I would never jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Here's where it gets really funny is I ended up breaking my leg jumping out of an airplane. And so, here it is, like, that's how I ended up getting medically discharged. But it's interesting when you phrase it that way of like that adrenaline. Like I would be terrified hanging off the side of a cliff like that.
Yeah.
So the fact that you did that is just incredible.
Yeah. And I've said before, I've never parachuted, never done any kind of skydiving. And I don't do it now because I have a wife and 3 kids who are relying on me to be alive and well and healthy. If I was single, I guarantee you, I would be like going to greater and greater and greater heights to jump from, just because it's like, there's that adrenaline to it. But then you take that idea and you stuff it, is the word that came to mind, stuff it into like the more controlled setting that I live in, right? Mm-hmm. And then I create scenarios, and I'm getting much better at this, but this is my default, is to create scenarios in which I have to work under pressure. Mm. So there's a certain certification I have to complete by the end of each year, and I have the entire year to do it. And for the last 3 years, I've completed it on December 17th, December 17th, and December 14th. Because like, that's just one little way of creating this sense of pressure. Like, and it takes 5 hours to do it. So it's not like you can just sit down and do it in 15 minutes, but I create this pressure to get it done. And I think part of that's where I have this challenge with procrastination, right? I will always be 2 minutes late or always be 5 minutes late. I think it's creating that small bit of adrenaline almost. Does this make sense? To like have to operate and get this like little rush, like having to rush in at the last minute.
It totally does. And quite frankly, I've never made the correlation between the two. And reason, it makes total sense. And I see that because, I mean, obviously we've had this conversation before. Like I struggle with procrastination as well. Somebody will tell me to do something. My wife, for example, will ask me to do something 50 times before I finally do it. And it's not like I don't intend, it's not like I intentionally do it to get back at her or anything. I just, I'll get to it when I get to it. Right. It's interesting that you share that perspective though, of how it integrates in your daily life. Because one of the things that I've been looking at is if I'm somebody who thrives on those adrenaline rushes, I look around it day to day, and quite frankly, I don't experience that very often. And part of that has raised different questions around how is that impacting my overall mood? How is that impacting my happiness? Because quite frankly, man, like there's no better feeling than going 160 in a car. I had motorcycles and all those things. I don't have any of those things anymore. And so it's really started to pose this question of like, what kind of hobbies can I get into? but you also have this other component of where like we're getting ready, we've got our first child coming in February. That's a whole nother game changer, right? I'm definitely not going to be jumping out of airplanes on the regular on the weekend. But I look at our lives and I feel like, and this may be a conversation for a different podcast, but I think we're getting too comfortable. Like we look at our day-to-day society and how we function. We've got these cozy desks with these air-conditioned rooms with the lights, and there's so much comfort around us that we're not worried about getting attacked by wildlife, right? When we didn't have all these fancy structures and buildings, we weren't climbing trees trying to ravage our food. And so I'm wondering, how does that impact us long term as things in everyday life get easier and easier? And so part of the way that I have been able to implement some of those little spikes of adrenaline is challenging myself physically. It's an area that I've been putting a lot of emphasis on, is getting my health in check. And so like today, I had 2 workouts. I got up early this morning, went to the gym before I went to work, came back home. It's 95 degrees here in Tennessee. I decided to go for a run. And so it's like those little things that I'm able to push myself, like you were sharing earlier, of like those little moments of procrastination where it fuels, it gives you that little sense of like, yeah, that little hit of adrenaline. I'm looking for different ways. And even with a workout, it's like, it's still not the same. So it's like, how can we incorporate those things? That's something that I'm exploring. It's like, how can I incorporate that back into my life? Maybe it's not jumping out of an airplane or, going $160 in a car, but what are other hobbies where I can get that sense of fulfillment? Because it is something that's definitely missing.
So I'm curious, I don't know if this ties into this all or nothing adrenaline type of conversation. Do you find yourself to be more of an optimist or a pessimist?
Depends on the day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting when you correlate this to everyday life, and that's something that I do want to really emphasize on here. As we're having this conversation, because we can talk about these abstract things, right? Of being all or nothing, jumping on planes, but like, what does that look like in the everyday life? I think that's so important. And so I do want to discuss that when it comes to whether I'm an optimist or I'm a pessimist. This comes to the breakthrough that I've had. And I think now is a perfect time to share this. So this is very important. I want you to listen closely to this. I sat down with some of the other coaches that are at Ramsey, and we were talking about just some of the areas that I was struggling with. And it was awesome because I got to get coached myself with the other coaches. And is what I started to realize is at work and in business and in sales, I'm thriving, right? Like I'm on fire. I'm having a blast. I can lay my head down every single night and know that I've accomplished what I was capable of, right? But then I looked at different areas like my health, which has been a struggle for me ever since I was a little kid. I look at areas like even finances, of like this consistency of being on our budget. Let's face it, like we all face challenges. We're not always perfect with our budget. And so I started to see these correlations of like these different areas where I looked at business and things were going really well. But then for my health, or even for finances, like correlating this back to when we started embarking on our financial journey of getting our finances in check, I noticed that I was struggling in those areas. So for me, I started to unpack, like, what is the difference between that two? How can I thrive in one area so well, but struggle in the other areas? And, this is something that me and you have talked about numerous times, but I truly believe the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. But here it is, I'm looking at this scenario that's unfolding. It's like, how can I have the discipline and the structure there, but it's falling apart in other aspects? And it helped me to realize that I love to win and I hate to lose, but I have to be set up for success. If I am not set up for success, I immediately wash my hands and walk away. And I don't feel guilty about it.
Mm.
And so what this looked like in an everyday, I'm going to give you a budgeting perspective. I'm going to give you the health perspective. When it came to our finances, our coach that we were working with, I remember one of the areas that me and my wife frequently overspend in was eating out. And we don't shop, we don't buy expensive clothes, nothing like that. It was always in our eating out budget. And I remember when we sat down with our coach, we had our budget at $300 a month. And she shared, hey, I want to challenge you to drop it down to $100 this upcoming month. And I looked at things, and part of me was like, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I'm always up for a good challenge, right? Like, I'd love to win, going back to that earlier. But we weren't consistently hitting 300. We were always going a little bit over. And I remember that next month I had to move. We also had a vacation plan. Now, granted, the vacation was paid for in cash. It's not like I was throwing on a credit card or anything like that. But I knew that I was struggling to make $300 in a regular month work. And you want me to drop it down to 100, and I've got to go on vacation and move with all this. And as bad as it sounds, I immediately knew that I was not going to do it. Even though I was challenged to it, I knew immediately I was going to fail. And I remember in that month, I didn't even look at our eating out budget. I still to this day don't even know what we spent, because I was so just like, this is not going to work.
Just throw care to the wind.
Yeah. And here it is. I realized, like, that would be like me saying, hey, I'm going to go run a marathon tomorrow. I haven't been training. I haven't prepared myself, but I'm just going to go embark on this crazy challenge. I'm not setting myself up for success. And so what that looked like is consistently hitting $300 a month. And then let's drop it down to 250. Hit consistently at 250. Then let's drop it down to 200. So it's setting myself up for success with those little micro wins. What that looked like in the health journey was I've been constantly yo-yoing. I'd lose a bunch of weight, gain a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight, gain a bunch of weight. And what I started to realize when it came to my health journey is I was trying to lose 4 or 5 pounds in a week. If I didn't lose 4 or 5 pounds, I would throw my hands up in the air and I would start stuffing my face with a bunch of food that I knew I shouldn't be. And the shift and the breakthrough that I've had recently is, instead of trying to lose 4 or 5 pounds, why don't we just focus on losing 1 or 2? Because I've been consistently yo-yoing for so long that I oftentimes stayed at the same weight. But let's face it, if I lose 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds a week, that's 8 pounds. Whereas, in a month, whereas previously, like, I would just fluctuate up and down, up and down. And so I look at that and it's like, it's taking these areas that I do want to improve, but setting up these micro steps, little wins that I can get for myself that motivate and inspire me. Because like I shared at the beginning, I love to win and I hate to lose. And so I feel like for so long, I made this all or nothing mentality. I made it wrong. Instead of looking at it as, how is it a gift? What ways does it serve me? Don't get me wrong, there's certainly some downfalls with it.
Yeah.
But whenever I was able to see that, as long as I set myself up for success, it's a wonderful thing that fuels the fire. So
that makes a lot of sense. And I resonate with a lot of that. It's almost as if, so let's see if, in my words, if it makes sense to you. I love to win. I hate to lose. But if I don't even try, I disengage, right?
mm-hmm.
And I don't lose.
That's a whole nother way of looking at it.
Like, I know that I lose, but I didn't try, so the loss doesn't feel as bad.
So I don't care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I didn't try. So I can write off the loss as I didn't try, as opposed to I tried and I didn't make it.
Oh, that is so good. I think about that with like sports,
Mhm.
like people challenging me to different sports. And it's like my wife, she's super athletic. Her whole family, like they're very naturally gifted at sports.
Mhm.
Um, and so for me, it's like, don't get me wrong, I enjoy sports, but I am not like, I'm like that awkward, stocky build where it's like, I, I was too small to be really good at football. I had like stocky shoulder. I was like too small to be a lineman, but I was also like too big for other positions.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have made a halfway decent linebacker maybe. But by the time I even went into being a linebacker, it just, it just didn't work. But I've noticed that like when people are paying sports, because my wife, she's extremely competitive.
Mhm.
And if I've like never really played a sport or a game, it's so true. Like, I don't even care if I lose because it's like, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And it totally comes down to like, I use that as an excuse of like, well, I don't really play the game, or, I've never really done this before. So
Yeah.
if I don't follow through with the commitment, it's no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So the exact principle, right, scenario we're talking about. We were at my sister's house a couple weeks ago, and her husband is like he gets strategy. Like he just looks at anything and like he gets strategy. You play any kind of strategy game with him, and you're gonna lose, right? It's just
Yeah.
And so, do you remember the game Stratego, or have you ever played the game Stratego?
I've heard it, but I've never played
Okay,
it. I'm
so
not
I have
familiar with it.
not played it. It's a strategy game. Okay, so we were at their house. My son, 9 years old, had never played Stratego before, so I played several games with him. And then Tim, my brother-in-law, um, we were going to play each other. My natural tendency was to just goof around and like set up the board in a way that I could not win, so that when I lost, I was like, well, I knew that from the beginning, right?
But I planned that out,
I
right?
planned it out. I planned to not win so that I wouldn't have to bear the crushing weight as I would feel it of actually having tried and not won. But I said to myself, you know what? If I actually try, I have a chance, right? And I'm okay if I don't win, even if I've tried really hard. He beat me by one move, which is way closer than I ever thought I'd get. But the point is, like, before I understood what it was like to hate to lose so badly that you don't even try, I would have just goofed off.
Mm-hmm.
No, the result's the same. I lost.
But
And this but is
yeah,
super important, right? But I did my absolute best,
exactly.
right? And winning was not winning was okay.
Exactly.
And I think we could go into this whole other rabbit trail of why we have this mindset, right? Why winning is so important, right? But I think from a young age, like my parents expected a lot of me, and they gave me a lot of support in doing well and excelling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got praised. I mean, I got praised in a lot of stuff, but I mean, that's when I especially got praised, was when I did really well. And so I associated doing really, really well with lots of good things, right? Just praise and recognition and identity. It became my identity to win.
Yeah.
And so I had to propagate the identity by continuing to win. And when I didn't win, it didn't take away from my identity if I didn't try.
So here's like a caveat with that. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I hate to lose because of how I'm going to be perceived by others.
You're saying that's your perspective on it?
Yeah. So like, does that come up for you? Because like and like, I know we've had this conversation. Like I'm one of those people. I want everybody to like me, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so for me, like, not only have I cultivated this desire to win, because let's face it, I get attention. People are, hey, good job, Dalton, right? But I also hate to lose because I'm wondering how I'm going to be perceived. And so going back to like that excuse of what comes up, it's like, hey, I can play it off like, hey, I didn't even try. It's no big deal, you know?
Yeah. So I think, so let me take that a little bit further and see if this makes sense.
Yeah.
And one of my clients, we were talking the other last week, and he made this comment, and I never put it that way before, but yeah, I resonated with it deeply. He said, when, in same kind of a conversation, when I lose, I don't like to have to face myself after the fact. Because he and I beat myself up over losing. And maybe it's because I'm wondering what people think of me. But for me, I think it's this internal expectation. Well, but let's go back though, and I'm thinking out loud here, so just bear with me. But I think that inner expectation is based on, well, if I just did better, people would like me. And if people like me, I'd feel like I belonged.
Exactly. And it definitely comes back to that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
I feel like I was always that kid. I always had a good group of friends, but I wasn't the friend that like, I always had to call my friends to hang out. It wasn't, my friends weren't calling me to hang out. And that was like the hard thing. That was that sense of belonging. It's like, now granted, whenever I'd call them to ask them to hang out, they were always there. It's not like they'd blow me off or anything like that. But I always had to be that person that made the phone call. And so when it comes to that sense of belonging, it's interesting. Like I look at so many different ways of how I haven't operated as myself. I've been different to feel like I belong in a crowd. But yet, as I've started to like work on myself and have these breakthroughs of like looking at these different things as gifts, I feel like for so long it was weird to share like, hey, I want people to like me. Yeah. Right? Like that was something that I wouldn't share with people. But here it is. It's like we have these conversations, and little do we know that a lot of us are feeling the same way.
And that's the beauty of this conversation right here, is that for probably until a year, definitely two, maybe even just 1 year ago, like admitting that, I might not even have admitted that to myself. Because, and here's a whole other piece, there's a pain to it, right? I want people to like me. The other side of it is people don't like me as much as I want them to. And then I start judging myself about why.
Right. So true.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Do they not like the way I talk? Is it because of my stutter? Is it,
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember as 15-year-old, 16-year-old, and my parents were missionaries, so we were in Ireland at the time. But one specific day, I remember I had this conversation at church with another teenager. And for some reason, I didn't feel like it went as well as I wanted it to. And like, I literally replayed that conversation in my head. Like, I even think I was in the bathroom looking in the mirror, like almost having this conversation with myself, with that person again. Like, just wondering, what could have I done better? Like, what did I say? What was my intonation like? And I just like this entire judgment on what was probably just a perfectly normal conversation. Because I walked away not feeling as liked as I wanted to have been. So, and that's the piece about like having to face myself after the fact.
Perception is a whole nother, like that's a whole nother combo too,
Yeah.
that we could get into. I mean, I could give you an example of how this happened recently. I remember we switched over to the group coaching model, the topical calls, right? And we did group coaching previously, but I remember I was sitting there and I heard Jeremy talk about how awesome his topical call went. He's talking about, it was his first one. He had this awesome format, like everybody was coming together and they were gelling well. And so I almost wish he wouldn't have shared that with me, because here I am, I'm on this group coaching call and I'm so in my head. Like I'm so in my head that I'm not even able to be present. And I'm going through and like I'm getting great feedback from everybody on the call. And I get to the end and I even ask people like, hey, what did you feel like this format? I didn't have like, not to toot my own horn or anything, but nobody said anything negative. I still got off that call. And I remember Jeremy looking over at me. And full transparency, man, I'm an emotional person. I'm totally a crier, not ashamed of it. And he just looks at me and I'm like borderline, like I start tearing up. He's like, dude, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, this call was a disaster. And he looks at me and he says, good. And I'm like, of course you would say that, right? And so long story short, we have this conversation, he's coaching me through it. And he's like, I want to listen to this call on the way home. And I'm like, well, if you're going to listen to this call, like I need to go back and listen to it too, And sure enough, I'm like, oh, I'm all worked up, freaking out. Get in my car and I listened to the replay of this coaching call. It was actually a really good call. Like probably one of my better coaching calls that I've had of the hundreds that I've done. But it's interesting. Like here it is, Derek. I'm in my head saying that was a terrible sales, or that was a terrible coaching call. People are not getting value from it. And then you go back and you look at it or you listen to it, or you go back to that person and you ask them, hey, did you perceive it this way? And it's like, they're like, what are you talking about? Or I didn't mean it that way at all.
Is there anything that could have happened in that call that would have made you feel better than you did about it?
I'm very much a words of affirmation person. I don't deny that at all. Again, it goes back to wanting to be liked. I want people to tell me that they like me, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, because in that moment I did have, but it wasn't till the end of the call. And so I think that I beat myself up so bad throughout that entire call that even though I was receiving the words of affirmation, I didn't have that breakthrough. Whereas whereas in most cases, it's like whenever I hear that, it's an easy switch for me in most cases.
Similar, but different is when I started doing these podcasts. When I have a one-on-one conversation with you, I can tell pretty much what you're thinking, right?
Yeah.
I can tell if it's going well. I can tell what you think of me, right? At least I can tell what I think you think of me.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But when I publish even this episode, right? I don't know who's going to watch it. I don't know what they're going to think. And there's been a couple, full transparency, of these episodes that I published, and like nobody could say anything that would make me feel better. It feels that way. Like I just beat myself up because I don't know. It's the unknown of what are people thinking of me right now. And there's no way for me to know. And it's like I've thrown this ball out in the air and I don't know if it's going to drop. I don't know if it's going to bounce when it drops. I don't know if it's going to smash into smithereens when it drops. And I have no control over it. And I'm learning that that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning that Derek doesn't have to have full control over what people think of him, because I never did.
Yeah. Right. So you look at the video, you see the views going up. Maybe you get a couple comments, but it's like the views don't match the comments.
Right. And like, so the views go up, fantastic. But then I go, okay, well, that was my best video yet, but did more people like it than not like it? Right. And I'll always find something to create this tension about. Right. I think this idea of always wanting more, right? It's the almost adrenaline junkie thing, right? The all or nothing, right? If I truly stepped into the all or nothing, the unhealthy piece of it, I would never get enough. Whatever it is that I'm going for, I would never get enough.
It's so interesting that you bring that up too, because oftentimes you hear people who struggle with addictions.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to have that all or nothing that all or nothing mentality.
Yeah.
And that's something that resonated with me. It's that desire of always wanting more. Yeah. Even when you look around and life is great.
Yeah.
Like I look around at life and I am truly grateful for, where the Lord has brought me. I look at my marriage that I have with my wife, the career that I have, all these different aspects, but there always is that, but it could be better. But I could make more money, but I could have better connections, but I could have more likes. And it's interesting that you bring up the likes perspective, because I've gone like ghost on social media for probably the past 3 years. And part of that's a whole nother conversation. There's a fear there. But that's why I don't have social media on my phone. Because it's constantly, don't get me wrong, I still occasionally check social media. Mm-hmm. But it's part of this constant more. And I remember whenever I used to post a lot for my business and stuff previously, I would always look at the likes and who liked it, who commented. And I it was like this infatuation with it. Yeah. Now granted, now I feel like I would have a healthier relationship with it. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting how you see like this constantly wanting more and like those addiction tendencies that come along with that. Mm-hmm. And so like for me, I came to a point, Derek, where it's like I realized I can't have a healthy relationship with sugar. I just can't. I've tried to incorporate a little bit of it, just say, hey, you know what, Dalton, just do it for today. And whenever I'd have a little bit, I'm going to go all out with it. And it's interesting because, back before I was walking with the Lord, I partied a lot. And I saw alcoholism runs in both sides of my family. It's had a large impact on my family. And I saw those same tendencies. I could never go out and have a casual drink. If I was going to drink, I'm going to have a lot of drinks. And now, granted, now that things have changed, I still have a drink occasionally here and there, but it's never like it used to. So I've been able to have like an okay relationship with that, where I can have, I can have a glass of whiskey, whenever I'm out with some friends. But I can't have that relationship with sugar. Sugar is that one thing that I know I can't have a little bit of it. And that would be like, I've come to realize that addiction is so strong that would be like me going up to an alcoholic and saying, hey, you can have one drink. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember, I'll see if I can make sure I tell a story right. Somebody asked me one time, who's my coach, she said, we were talking about work. And I've always said, if I was single, I'd be a workaholic.
Oh.
No doubt about it. And so my coach said, so if you learned that you had terminal cancer and you had 24 hours to live, what would you do? Like I'd spend the entire 24 hours with my family. I wouldn't work for a minute of it. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. What if you found out you have terminal cancer and you had 6 months to live? What would you do? I thought a little bit more about it. I said, I probably wouldn't work at all. And I just spend the entire time with my family doing all the bucket list stuff. Right. She goes, okay, let's imagine that you have 1 year. 1 year from today, you're going to die. What would you do? I paused. And I said, I would probably work for 6 months and then take the next 6 months and do all the bucket list stuff. She said, Derek, do you have good life insurance? I said, yeah. So your family's going to be taken care of when you die. Yeah. Do you need to work for the next 12 months? Like, could you make it work? I said, yeah, we can make it work. Then why are you going to work for the next 6 months? And I realized in that moment that I got so much identity and value out of going to work and creating something and saying, I'm working, I'm doing this, that I was going to take half of the rest of my life in that scenario and work. Because I get this, call it a high. I get this like high off of like working. I only have 12 months left. I'm going to take 6 months of it and go do this. Like I had to find something to chase.
I'm so happy you brought this up. So I'm going to play kind of like, I'm going to pose an opposite question of what your coach shared.
Okay.
Because this was another part of my breakthrough that I had the other day when I was having that conversation. I was posing the question of one of the things that I feel like I've been struggling is I haven't felt refreshed. And, you know, we talk about rest and what does rest look like for me. And this is nothing against anybody else that has, this is just for me. Yeah. I do not feel rested sitting on a couch watching television. Internally, I am like, I could be more productive. This just does not feel good. Like, don't get me wrong. I occasionally enjoy a good movie and those kind of things. I'm not denying that. It's not like I'm this perfect saint that never watches television. However, that doesn't fill me up. That doesn't cause me to feel restful. And so as I was talking with the other coaches, I said, well, where do you get rest from? And I said, it's interesting, Derek, and I'm curious if you find this in yourself too. We were talking about procrastination earlier. Yeah. Procrastination makes me feel terrible. However, when I'm productive, I feel really good. Even if it's simple things. It doesn't even have to be necessarily work related. It can be little things getting done around the house. It can be checking off that little list of things that I need to do. And is what I realize is the things that fire me up is these kind of conversations that we're having, talking about business, going through trainings, learning different things. And there is, to be clear, there's a fine line between being a workaholic. But if I get refreshment in spending an hour after work learning more, reading a book, having a conversation with another coach, is that wrong?
I think so. Is that wrong? I think it's got to be an individual question, but nothing inherently makes that wrong, right? That I wouldn't say that's the definition of being a workaholic, right? Doing one extra, training an hour with a coach. But I'll say, so what I'm describing as like going and doing 6 months of work and then leaving for 6 months, it was not because I wanted to be refreshed. It was because subconsciously, and my default, I think, is that I perceive that I am valuable when I am doing, when I'm achieving. And to me, 12 months, even if it's the last 12 months of my life, 12 months is a long time to not be achieving in the way that I have set up achieving for most of my life. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. And I think that all correlates to why we're always so hard on ourselves. Because deep down, like we know that there's a level of production that we could have had. We got that much closer to the goal. We could have made that little bit more money. And so when you look at it through that lens and you're breaking it down strictly from an achievement perspective, that's part of what I've had to become okay with. You know, we bring it back to the small wins. I'm a huge believer in how compound builds momentum. The small wins incrementally and consistently really help you to achieve that goal much quicker oftentimes than when we run at it with all our might and give it our all, because there is the contrary, right? Like there becomes the point of diminishing means. For example, you can only read so many books. If you're not implementing what it is that you're learning, what does it matter? You can only consume so many different training contents. Look at it through a coaching perspective. You can only be coached so many times. You can have the profound insight. However, if you don't take the action, nothing's going to change. And I think that that's part of the challenge too with coaching, is often the action part can be vilified. I don't know if that's a technical term, but like they make it wrong to talk about the action side of things. But there's no getting around that. Granted, yes, you got to have the insight, the perspective shift, the behavior change, but you also have to implement. And so it's interesting when you bring that up, because there is a selfishness with the achievement side of things too, for me. Because full transparency, even if I was on my deathbed, I still don't think I would sit around for an entire year. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah. And maybe for you, your answer would be different for a different reason.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, when I realized that I would work for the sake of working for 6 months and then spend the rest of the time just hanging out and traveling, experiencing life and making memories with my family, that I would be a workaholic if, well, that scenario to me drew out the fact that the if is not just if I was single and didn't have a family. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then let's draw this into a bigger picture. How does it show up in my everyday life? Right. That by default need to chase something. How's that showing up in my everyday life? How specific to work? How did that show up today? Was I aware how it showed up today? Because the way I do it in one area is the way I do it in every area. So if I'm going to do it, over the next 12 months, if I only have 12 months to live, then somehow that's a driving force in me today, whether I'm aware of it or not. And I think if we evaluate everything that we do through an all or nothing lens, like through the lens of being an all or nothing type of person, I wonder if it starts showing up in different ways than we even realized.
When you pose it with that question of like, what are we, where is that showing up every day? It's part of what relates to that exhaustion too, for me at least. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm exhausted because I'm constantly trying to achieve something. Mm-hmm. So I'm constantly chasing this carrot. The interesting thing too, though, is I fail a lot more than I win. And so when you look at it of that, I love to win and I hate to lose. Here it is. I'm constantly chasing every day. I don't feel rested because I'm constantly trying to achieve something. And yet I'm losing often, which is then causing me to be my biggest critic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this cycle, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I think as we wrap up, the one thing I think that you said that really spoke to me was, and again, I think this is a tendency of being all or nothing, is we vilify either things are good or they're bad, right? So, and we didn't even get into this. What are the benefits of being an all or nothing type of person, right? I think a lot of it was, how is it showing up in our life, and how are we stepping into this awareness? Being an all or nothing type of person has fantastic benefits.
It absolutely does.
The seed that is the all or nothing type of person can either be nurtured to draw out some of the worst tendencies and the worst characteristics in me. And that same seed can be nurtured to blossom into some amazing strengths that other people aren't gifted with. They have other strengths, but that seed. So it's stepping into the awareness of this seed and choosing to step into the growth areas of it.
Well, if you look at, here we are, we're going to like the accomplishment side of things. But if you look at these individuals that have accomplished absolutely incredible things, it doesn't even have to be monetarily related. You look at different education fields, professors. Obviously, you got the business front. You got athletes. The Olympics. I don't know if they're still going on, if they just finished up. I haven't been following them, but they have to have an all or nothing mentality. And so the question is like, what would be different if these individuals didn't have that all or nothing mentality? How, we think of technology, we think of travel, all these different things. Somebody went all in on making a gigantic tin plane fly. That's not something you just casually do. You have to be obsessed with the thought of flight.
It's harnessing it. How do you harness it while at the same time not destroying yourself?
Because it's very easy to fall down that tendency. I mean, again, this is not a dig at society or different things, but I mean, if we think about it, people that are struggling with addiction, they're unable to come up with the finances to provide a roof over their head.
Yeah.
Yet every day they're able to find the money for their next fix. And so it does come to that. What are you harnessing it for? Are you harnessing it for good, or are you harnessing it for your own detriment?
On that question, let's end.
I agree.
And I have a feeling there'll be a part 2 sometime down the road.
Oh, I'm ready, man. Whenever. This has been awesome.
Dalton, thank you for stepping in this. Thank you for being transparent and sharing your story. And
absolutely.
We'll do a part 2. I'm looking forward to it.